Become a sustaining member of the Commonwealth Club for just $10 a month.
Welcome to the Commonwealth Club. I'm George Hammond, Chair of the Humanities Forum. I'd like to welcome our online audience and our live audience here in San Francisco. This is one of over 900 programs that the Commonwealth Club has live streamed since the beginning of the pandemic. And we have a great author here again with us tonight. He's coming back after 18 months. 18 months ago, we sat down with him, although he didn't really sit down here. We were on stage and he was, brought in by our live stream technology. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. Since that time, he has sort of become a crowdsourced, form of information on the same subject. He thought he was going to retire after that last book, but so much new information came in that in 18 months later, he has a new book. So we have Mark Shaw here with us tonight to talk about his life of fighting for justice for Marilyn Monroe, JFK, and Dorothy Kilgallen. And welcome, Mark Shaw, to the Commonwealth Club again.
Thank you. Thank you.
So, Mark, you thought you were going to retire.
Well, it's amazing. I was telling some of the people out here, my life's just been magic. I'm so blessed with so many things that have happened to me. I have no idea how I ended up. This is the 6th book I've written touching on the lives of Marilyn, Dorothy, and the JFK assassination. And a lot of it, as George said, has come from people who have watched my interviews, presentations. I think there's 7.5 million views up on the YouTube, and read my books. And I was going to quit after the last book, which was Collateral Damage, which connected the lives and times of Marilyn, JFK, and Dorothy Kilgallen for the first time. But in February, I got a telephone call, and it changed everything for me. And I think it'll change everything for you and all of the perspective that you ever had about the JFK assassination. So we'll come back to that in a little bit, but basically we are going to expose what I call the most alarming governmental corruption in U.S. history tonight.
Yeah. Can we say it's about the Warren Commission?
Yes,
okay.
Certainly can.
It's about the Warren Commission. Okay.
It's about the Warren Commission.
Yeah. One of those people who crowdsourced the information had personal access to the Warren Commission.
That's right. First time.
Yeah. So this is Nicholas's comment about it, about the book, and through the eyes of Dorothy Kilgallen.
And this gentleman, yes.
Oh, this is the signing of the Warren or the delivery?
Yeah, we'll come back to that if we can.
And we'll come back to that.
Yeah,
okay,
please.
Great. So we're going to start with a little bit of how Mark got into this.
Well, I'm the ultimate overachiever. George probably knows that. I nearly, I'm not the smartest guy in the world. I have no idea how I got all this information, except that the Holy Spirit and also Dorothy Kilgallen kind of sent it my way. And so I felt a duty to present it to audiences and let them know. And my books are stop and think books. This is, I think, my 31st book. And I want people to stop and think about important things. And in this situation, people have asked me, how'd you do this? With nothing better than average intelligence. And so in this particular book, I took people back to the early years for that reason, and also to show them why I feel like I've had the credentials to have ended up investigating what I believe is one of the most important events in history, the killing of John F. Kennedy, as well as the collateral damage to that, Marilyn Monroe and Dorothy Kilgallen, who both gave up their lives at early ages. So I went all the way back to the first time at Purdue in 1964. And as you'll see, I put this slide in because that shows me in the front row of my fraternity class. And that's the independence that I've had since then. I've always never been afraid to go out on my own, and I get criticized for my research at times and things like that. And then this is my wonderful mother and father, and that's in there because the basic lesson that my father taught me was, if you're not smarter than other people, you just need to work twice as hard. And that's what I've done. I've gone the extra mile. An awful lot of other people have researched these topics, but they're not willing to go all the way, and that's what I think has helped me find this, my contributions to history, as I call them.
Yeah, it's hard for parent to know how smart you are, Mark. So
Everybody's amazed. I'm not kidding at what has happened to me, including me. So we did that, and then I want to go back and just quickly, we'll go through these a little quickly, but this is where I began to defend people. I feel like John F. Kennedy, Marilyn Monroe. Now, Marilyn Monroe died in 62, JFK 63, Dorothy 65, and then, of course, Bobby Kennedy in 68. They're my clients in some ways. And the reason I say that is because I started out as a public defender and then a criminal defense lawyer. And this is me. A gentleman they were trying to arrest him for a crime. He was on the loose, and I am there on the left-hand side with his mother and the chief of police in Indianapolis, trying to get him to come forward. And it didn't matter who it was or what they had allegedly done. I was there for them, just as I'm trying to be there for Marilyn and Dorothy and JFK. This was an article that was written about me. It's kind of in jest, but if you remember the television show Petrocelli, the Indianapolis Star called me a modern form of Petrocelli. I wore an old used trench coat. My office was filled with pop bottles. People would pay me with grocery bags full of cash. You only take cash when you're a criminal defense lawyer. So I would stuff them in these old books on these shelves. And when I left finally Indianapolis, I had a whole bunch of that cash that I stuffed in a little car with me. So that is kind of where I began my defending people, as you may say. This was the biggest break of my life. Right after F. Lee Bailey, and you know who that is, represented Patty Hearst right here in San Francisco and blew that case, and I can give you some information about that tonight. But there was a case where a gentleman was supposedly, he was involved with a DNA agent who was put in a doctor's office, and that DNA agent ended up in a farmer's pond on a cement slab with no head. Okay? The headless torso case. He made the best decision of his life. He called F. Lee Bailey in Boston, Massachusetts. And Bailey then honored me by picking me among all the lawyers in Indiana to work with him. And that enhanced my reputation. You know, I was always at the jail first early in the morning and doing all that, but this made the big difference there. And Lee will come around a little bit later when I end up with Good Morning America, because he was responsible for that. And then this is a young man 5 years later that I represented who supposedly shot a social worker point blank range, senseless crime. And I tried that case, and I had a winning streak of a bunch of murder trials. And it so upset me as to what happened to this victim that when a reporter for the Star came up and said, what are you going to do now? I said, I quit. And I ended up moving to Colorado. I gave up the law practice, shocked everybody and all of that. But there's no winners in those cases. It's awful. Whoever perpetrated the crime, their life's over, and obviously the victim is as well. So and I want to mention one more thing there. That's where I learned to write. I never had any fancy classes, no training, no Iowa workshop. I learned how to write by talking to juries. And people are nice enough to say that my books are easily read. Well, they are, because I don't have any great vocabulary. I'm from a little town, Auburn, Indiana. I don't use big words at all, but I talk to the reader. And that's what I try to do, and that's what I've tried to do, especially in this new book, Fighting for Justice. So I moved to Colorado, and here's another one of those serendipitous points, because you may remember that Spider Savage, a famous skier, was shot and killed. And they suspected Andy Williams' wife, Claudine Longet, of doing that. F. Lee Bailey was supposed to try cover that case. He couldn't do it. He recommended me. Again, here's one of those magic things about my blessed life. Most people who end up on network television start at the lowest point you can possibly start with a local station. I started at the top, all right? I covered that trial. Claudine trusted me, and I want to go back to that too, because for whatever reason, people trust me, as you will hear from a gentleman who tells us all about the Warren Committee. They trust me with information. And that's what happened here. Claudine gave me her only statement about that case. I really felt like that actually she committed murder. They didn't find her guilty of murder, but that's how I got into national television. And at that time then also, I had an idea from doing some work for Good Morning America. That's where I covered the trial for, covered the trial for. And I ended up in a small news station in Miles City, Montana, and on the table was the Miles City Daily News. And Aspen, Colorado, where I was living, it didn't have any daily newspaper. So I came up with the idea, and the Aspen Daily News was born. It's still operating today. And that was my first writing. I wrote columns for that newspaper.
How many of you in the audience here remember the Claudine Longet murder? Because that was pretty
Oh, it was
famous.
huge at the time,
Yeah,
yes.
Andy Williams' wife. Just,
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right.
Okay, so we'll move ahead quickly. All right, why do we put Angelo Bruno in here? Well, everything you're going to hear now, you're going to see, will end up circling around to what I believe my biggest contribution to history is when we get to the Warren Commission. Angelo Bruno was a Philadelphia mobster, the mob king there. And Good Morning America set it up so I could go over and interview his lawyer. Well, we were shocked, as you can imagine, because those people are supposed to keep their mouth shut, right? So I went over there, and I interviewed this gentleman, and he gave us information we couldn't believe about Atlantic City gambling and everything. It was on the show the next morning, and a huge hit. And so the producer said, Mark, stay there and see if he'll talk to you again. So I called this man's lawyer on the telephone to see if I could talk to him. And when I talked to the secretary, she was silent. And finally, I knew she was crying. And she said, well, Mr. Shaw, I guess you don't know. When my boss started his car this morning, it blew up. And that'll come around when we talk about the fact that you can't mess around with the mafia. They play by their own rules, and that's the first time I learned that. Just quickly with these two cases. I covered the O.J. Simpson case. What I remember is a party in Hollywood at one point, going there, and there was O.J. with Brown, Nicole Brown Simpson. I'm telling you what, she lit up the room. There was nobody in there. And it reminds me of when I worked on Marilyn's case. When Marilyn was on the screen, there was nobody else there. And so when I was actually on an ESPN show when O.J. was driving around in his Bronco, you remember, and all of that. But all I remember is the horrid situation of this woman passing away and dying. Kobe Bryant. I covered that case for ESPN as well. I went to Colorado where he was charged with rape. And I will tell you right now, he was guilty as hell. And every time I hear about all its basketball exploits and everything else, that man should have been in prison. I went to the early hearings in that case. The prosecution completely disregarded all of the manners of evidence and everything else. Let the victim's name be known, and from that point it scared the hell out of her, and she went away for sure. That's a guilty man right there, in my opinion. I wrote about it in USA Today, and I got all kinds of criticism, but I listened to the evidence. He would have been convicted. All right, so here's the next changing time. I moved back to Indiana from where I had been in California, and the judge in the case of Mike Tyson was charged with rape in 1992, and the judge in the case had been a prosecutor when I was a defense lawyer. So I was living in southern Indiana, and I called her, and I said, hey, I'd like to cover the case. Can you get me a credential? She said, well, Mark, you've been involved in the media. Why don't you handle the media? And so I did that, and I sat right in the front row, and I watched this man with the worst defense that anybody had ever had. Don King, his promoter, decided that he wanted to get a lawyer for Simpson, and Don King had just won a tax evasion case. So he said, well, if that lawyer's good enough for me, good enough for Mike. He had a tax evasion lawyer, just like you're going to hear that Jack Ruby had Melvin Belli, who was a tort lawyer. Well, what happened to Tyson? I remember the time when the jury came in, and here's how he went. Guilty. He should have never, ever been convicted of that crime. The evidence wasn't even close to being overwhelming at all. So I decided, hey, I'll write a book about it. This is the first one, 47 years old in 1992. Down for the count. And I remember, just quickly, I remember waking up one morning and I was told that there was a review in the Indianapolis Star. And this is how I started my literary career. Read it to me, would you please? They said, no, you sure? I said, yeah, I'll read it. Mark Shaw's book on Tyson, worthless. Honest to goodness. That's how I started.
You didn't put that blurb on the back of the book?
I did not. I did not. All right, so here's Mr. Belli. I practiced law with Melvin Belli in the 1980s. That's why I've had such an advantage over everybody else who's investigated the JFK assassination, because I knew this man. And I worked in his office at one point, and I helped him tape some commercials and a little video that he put on the air. Tort lawyer, as you probably know, king of torts, no criminal law experience whatsoever. But as I worked on that particular book, I came to find, if we can go to the next slide, I came to find out there he is, always, out in front with things. And that was the photograph that changed everything about Belli. That is Melvin Belli, and in the middle is a gangster named Mickey Cohen from Los Angeles. Terrible, destructive, dangerous man. And I thought, wait a minute, Belli's a friend of that guy? And I said, yeah, and I came to the conclusion, yes, he was. And so I looked into that, and I put all that in Melvin Belli, King of the Courtroom, because he ended up representing Jack Ruby, who shot Lee Harvey Oswald. And being a curious guy, just like George here, I'm not going to let that go by. What in the hell is he doing representing Jack Ruby, charged with a capital crime? And that really catapulted me then into figuring out that the mafia somehow or another could have been involved in JFK's death, okay? So I've got all that in that particular book. JFK is assassinated. What do we have next then? Oh, right there, that's Ruby shooting Oswald. There's Ruby, and there's Melvin Belli with Jack Ruby at the Ruby trial. And that will all play along when we get into talking about Dorothy Kilgallen. Next. All right, so from there I thought, okay, I need to look into this. Again, these clues just popped up in my life, and then I would follow through on them and try to see how I could expose the best evidence about them. I don't speculate. I use primary sources and all of that. And so The Poisoned Patriarch was the next book. And I went back to the 1960 election, and many of you may remember what happened then. JFK was going to lose to Richard Nixon if they didn't win Illinois and West Virginia. And what I found out was Joe Kennedy, because of some of his colleagues, so to speak, being involved in the mafia, he used Frank Sinatra to get a hold of a mafioso in Chicago, Sam Giancana, a mafioso in New Orleans named Carlos Marcello, who will figure in here, a bunch of them, and said to them, basically, Sinatra promised, if you help them win the election, the new administration will leave you alone. All right? So they help him win the election. And what's the first thing that happens? And I have an eyewitness who was right there at a breakfast when Joe Kennedy ordered JFK to appoint none other than who? Bobby Kennedy, Attorney General. And if you know anything about Bobby Kennedy, you know that he hated the mafia. He wrote a book called The Enemy Within, where he made fun of them. At the McClellan hearings, he talked about some of them giggling and things like that. He hated these guys. And to show his brother and his father that he was a big shot, he went ahead and sent Carlos Marcello to Guatemala, threw him out of the country. Marcello comes back, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, but Marcello comes back and he says to himself, I can't let Bobby Kennedy keep going. I want to kill that SOB, but if I do, good logic, then Jack Kennedy will come after me with everything the government has. But if I kill Jack Kennedy, all right, Bobby Kennedy will be powerless. And the proof there is what? That's exactly what happened. Bobby resigned as Attorney General, and they never, ever went after those guys again. So that was in The Poisoned Patriarch. All right, I'm done again. And this is Joe Kennedy. This is Bobby. There's Marcello, who he deported. Nick Pelleggio gave me a wonderful endorsement for this book. He told me long ago, anybody that's Sicilian, the first thing they think about when anybody picks on is revenge. And that is true. And it goes back to Angelo Bruno. You can't mess around with those guys. And Bobby Kennedy did, and it cost him, in my opinion, the life of his brother. Okay, so now we get to the one that I love. I love this woman, Dorothy Kilgallen. A lot of people don't know anything about her, okay? I didn't either. But I will tell you, I had a clue when I interviewed one of Melvin Belli's best friends. He said, oh, Melvin Belli knew Dorothy Kilgallen. I said, Dorothy Kilgallen? She was on a quiz show, What's My Line? How would he know her? Well, she was at the Ruby trial. And you know what Mel said about that? He said, Mark, he said, they've killed Dorothy, now they'll go after Jack Ruby. Now, this was after Dorothy had died. And so that really made me curious as to what this woman was doing. If you know anything about her, the New York Post called her the most powerful female voice in America. She was on What's My Line. She was a star performer there. She was like a prosecutor guessing the occupations of people. She had a newspaper column syndicated to 200 newspapers across the country, a radio show listened to by 1 million people every day. She was a big shot. The New York Post called her the most powerful female voice in America. In the next slide. And here she is. This is Dorothy. Her ancestry is from the west part of Ireland. This is her in the 8th grade, and this is dear Dorothy when she was just a cub reporter. So I learned a lot about her, and I then went back and I found some other information about her. In 1936, she competed in what they call the Race Around the World, which is a big deal. She and 2 other reporters traveled the world on commercial transportation. All right, they didn't have jets or anything else like that, so they took ships and railroad and everything else. She set records for all of the accomplishments that she had. This was Larry King on CNN one night told me this was a gutsy woman. She was a gutsy woman. She was a courageous woman, and as you'll see, it ended up costing her her life. There she is on What's My Line. She not only covered the coronation of the Queen, she got the Queen talked into letting her go to the first time when the Queen had a permanent, had her hair done. There's a clipping of that I have. There she is like that. And then the next one is her with Ernest Hemingway. How's this for a compliment? Dorothy Kilgallen is the greatest woman writer in the world. How's that? Pretty darn good. Okay? So there she is at the typewriter. And then she covered the big cases of the day. She covered the Charles Lindbergh baby kidnapping case. She covered the Dr. Sam Shepard case, which you may remember involved, became the fugitive, correct? All right? She covered that. This is my favorite photo of her because it tells all. She's standing in the middle of all these reporters in the courtroom at the Dr. Sam Shepard case, all right, trial. And all the reporters are doing what? Admiring her. How many people around the world have said to me, I wish we had a reporter with the integrity of Dorothy Kilgallen today? Unfortunately, we don't. Okay, so Dorothy Kilgallen. Why did she get involved in the JFK assassination? Well, she was a very, very close friend, George, as you know, of JFK. He had been to her home and played charades, been to parties, saw her all kinds of places. But the kicker was, at one point, Pierre Salinger invited her to the White House with her young son, Kerry. Where is Kerry? We've got him in the next client, one or so. Anyway, all right, we'll show that. Anyway, so went to the White House, and JFK made a big fuss over the little kid from the 3rd grade and the letters he brought and all of that. And it meant so much to her. He gave her gave him a PT-109 pin. So when JFK was killed, what Dorothy wrote in one of her columns, and we'll talk about the rest of them too, she wrote, "What I remember is a tall man stooping over a little boy, praising the letters he brought from his 3rd grade class. This is the man who died." She took it personally. And where did she do? She marched right out of that room, house of hers in New York, and went to the Ruby trial. Here is Dorothy in Dealey Plaza. Okay, she was right there. Here on the right-hand side, that's her being frisked at the trial. And what did she start doing? She didn't buy any of this Oswald alone stuff at all. And her first column she wrote was Oswald file must not close. And in there, and in the book, and there's so much more in the book, and I hope you'll take a look because it's all in the context of everything else that happened. But she basically said, justice is a big rug. When you pull it out from under one man, a lot of others fall too. And she went on to say, how can this happen where a guy named Oswald supposedly shoots the president, and then a guy named Jack Ruby walks in and kills him? It just didn't make sense to her at all. And right from the beginning, she made one terrible enemy, and that was J. Edgar Hoover, FBI director, who's out there shouting, as you remember, Oswald alone, Oswald alone, Oswald alone. All right, there's Dorothy with who? Melvin Belli and co-counsel Joe Tonahill. And she got to know him really well, and you can imagine she got every bit of information she possibly could out of Dorothy, that's for sure. There's Jack Ruby. And then she became what? Talk about trust again. She became the only reporter to interview Jack Ruby at his trial out of 400 reporters. It's hard to believe, but guess what the favorite show was, television show was at Jack Ruby's Carousel Club? What's My Line? These things are meant to be in many ways. So what happened is that she was able to interview him. And it was amazing because he told her things that we've never known, because you're going to hear that her investigative files were all taken care of. But in the book, you will see she wrote a column, Nervous Ruby Feels Breaking Point. And then you just have to read her incredible wordsmith. If I could write just half as well as Dorothy Kilgallen writes, I'd had a number of bestsellers instead of one, because I'm telling you what, it's so visual. You feel like you're there. She talks about him, his demeanor, and you can feel him there and all of that. She did that in all of her columns. An amazing writer for sure. And then, of course, what happened? Well, Belli came up with this defense. Get this. He wouldn't let Ruby testify, and then he made him look crazy by using a psychomotor epilepsy insanity defense. Okay? When you're a criminal defense lawyer, in the very first case I tried, I was appointed a public defender on a Friday, and I tried a first-degree murder case on the next Monday. And this guy had shot his girlfriend in front of, with a shotgun from 6 feet away in front of her kids. And I told James when I first met him, I just don't know how we're going to defend this, but he said he was drunk and he didn't mean to shoot her and all that, so I tried to do my best for him. Obviously, he was convicted. But that was the first time that I did that. In this situation, Melvin Belli never gave Jack Ruby a chance at all with that defense that he came up with, and obviously he was found guilty. Then Dorothy did it again, okay? And you're going to see how this happens. She's in the front row of the Jack Ruby trial, and she hears all this testimony. And she was writing it all down, and you can see it. There's another a picture of her with a clipboard, and she's got all these notes and everything else like that, what she heard with regard to what Ruby said and all of that. And so what happens then is that she is able, and we're going to find out how, all at once on the front page of the New York Journal-American, her newspaper, is Ruby's own story, his testimony before the Warren Commission. That was huge. That was like the Snowden NSA exposure, the Pentagon Papers, the Nixon tapes at the time. And who did she make an enemy there again of? J. Edgar Hoover, because he controlled the Warren Commission, as we will talk about, and was furious in terms of exactly how she got that information. That's a letter from Hoover to this guy named Rankin, who was the counsel for the Warren Commission. How in the world did she get all this information, and from who, and everything else? And what I love about this particular situation is he sent these 2 FBI agents. I like to think that they were these big burly agents over to her home. Here's little Dorothy, and they're interrogating her, okay? She didn't ask for a lawyer, and as you'll see, I'm going to tell you in a little while exactly what she told them. All right, so now Dorothy's in danger. And what we're going to find out is a missing piece here at the end, because I never realized how much danger this woman had gotten into. First of all, she had really figured out from what Jack Ruby told her, she went where? She didn't stay in Dallas and look into LBJ involved in the assassination. She didn't go to Washington, D.C. and look into the military complex. She didn't go to Miami and look into the Cubans. She went to New Orleans. And who was there? Carlos Marcello. And I believe when she was there, and there's a whole account of that in the new book, she had connected Marcello, Lee Harvey Oswald, and Jack Ruby. And I have new testimony in the book confirming that situation. So now she's got, who's she got as enemies? Well, for one, sure, is Hoover, but also Marcello. And you can't make enemies like that. So what happens? In November of 1965, November 8th, 1965, she's found dead in her New York townhouse, in a bedroom she never slept in, wearing her eyelashes, hairpiece, and makeup. She's dressed like she's going out on a date. And basically, Mark Sinclair, who's the second person there, that I'll mention what he said about her, he found her body I think she had died. We've proven in The Reporter Who Knew Too Much that she did not die of an overdose of drugs. I've proven she was murdered based on forensic evidence at the time. 3 barbiturates in her system, not 1. But the ME, medical examiner, comes along and calls it you'll get to love this because it coincides with Maryland's verdict. Overdose of drugs, circumstances undetermined. How's that for a determination of some sort? It's as ludicrous as the Warren Commission's Oswald alone theory is that you'll hear about in a little bit. So, Mark Sinclair, what did they find out about Dorothy being in danger? That's Charles Simpson, her other hairdresser. Right before she died, he said, if the wrong people knew what I know about the JFK assassination, it would cost me my life. Mark Sinclair, I'm afraid for my life and my family, and I've bought a gun. And the night before she dies, she goes to P.J. Clark's in New York City, and then she meets a man named Ron Pataki, who was a Midwestern journalist who was kind of using Dorothy to try to get to the top of that profession. I've proven in the book that he was compromised by J. Edgar Hoover. He was in trouble himself, and he got Pataki to inform on Dorothy and let Hoover and maybe Marcello, possibly too, what she was going to put in a tell-all book for Random House that she was writing. And as you will see, they could never let her write that book. So that's the danger she was in, but I'm going to add something to that. That is the telling blow. When she found out what I'm going to tell you, she was dead.
So, and Catherine Stone?
Catherine Stone, good, George. Saw Pataki, saw a gentleman with Dorothy at a hotel before she died. We've proven that that was him. We've proven that he, in all likelihood, accompanied her back to her townhouse, and that's where he inserted these barbiturates into a drink, a vodka and tonic drink, and that's what killed Dorothy. There's Mark Sinclair again. Dies of moderate dose. Forensic evidence over here. You know, I'm not the smartest guy in the world, researcher. Dorothy's autopsy, I couldn't get at the New York New York Medical Examiner's office because I'm not a part of the family. But National Archives, that's the most important place to find, viable, credible documents. That's where you need to go. And don't go to Wikipedia, for God's sakes. Anybody can go in there, write anything they want to, but go to the National Archives. And there was her autopsy. And you can't read it here, but you can read it in the book. 3 barbiturates, not 1. And one of them, 2 of these medical examiner guys looked into it, and they found out that they found a remnant of barbiturate, I think it was phenobarbital, on one of the glasses, which meant that somebody had opened the capsules and put them in the drink. And that was the tell. If you know who Dr. Cyril Wecht is, the greatest forensic scientist we've ever had in this country, he looked at all that and said, Dorothy Kilgallen was murdered. Okay, 10,000 people show up for her funeral. She should have never died. Never died. 10,000 people, all the dignitaries at the funeral. In fact, one woman came who told a story nobody ever knew, that Dorothy actually saw a burning building and went in there and saved a little baby. I mean, the accolades for her were absolutely amazing because she was this person. And this is the killer with regard to Ron Pataki. He wrote a poem, all right? And if you look at it closely, while I'm spilling, vodka roulette seen as relief possibility. While I'm spilling my guts, she is driving me nuts. Please fetch us 2 drinks on the run. Just skip all the noise and make one of them poison, and don't even tell me which one. I interviewed Ron Pataki several times. When you're a criminal defense lawyer or prosecutor, you're trying to find somebody who knows only the facts that the killer could know. That's how she died. You know what he said it was? It was humorous. It was a humorous poem. I tried to get the New York District Attorney's Office to investigate him. I tried to get the New York Police Department commissioner, who I went back to New York and visited with and all of that. Both of them looked into it and everything, but 60 years later, not something that's a priority in New York City, that's for sure. But I'll keep trying, especially with this new evidence that I've uncovered. All right, next up, I'm done again. I've had it. That's it. Mark quit. But then, again, lawyer in Fresno, California calls me, Greg Mullenix, and he says, I have something for you. I said, what's that? He said, I have the Jack Ruby trial transcripts. I feel like a dumbhead, just as like I felt like a dumbhead that I didn't look into the Warren Commission investigation enough. So Greg calls me and he says, I have this for you. And he sent me, let's go to the next page. Oh, no, that's back there. Right, that's me reading the transcripts of those the Ruby trial. 2,000 pages. Took me forever. And the book became Denial of Justice, and the next slide is really important because this is what Dorothy knew from the Ruby trial, which again, only she knew. And that was that Jack Ruby just didn't accidentally get into the basement of the Dallas Police Department and shoot Ruby, which has been perpetuated forever. In the trial, there was testimony that Ruby told someone the day before he shot Oswald, I will be there. I'm going to make like a reporter. The police will help me get into the building. The police were all friends of Ruby, as we'll see in a little while. So this was a big breakthrough because it really showed that Ruby was lying about all that. And we're going to connect him in again with Marcello and all the research that Dorothy did. All right, so I'm done again. And then many people around the world. I've got probably almost 4,000 emails from people. And they give me tips and they ask me questions. And one of the main questions was, is there a connection between the deaths of Marilyn Monroe, Dorothy Kilgallen, and JFK? And I didn't think there was until I saw this photograph. There's Marilyn, of course, beautiful Marilyn, and she should have never died either. Never. And there's Dorothy, Marilyn, and I think that's Eve Montan, who was in a movie with Marilyn. Okay? So, I don't know if you know, but they decided right away, after finding Marilyn, that she died of what they called a probable suicide. Dr. Weck told me he's done 16,000 autopsies. He's never seen probable suicide. Either it's a damn suicide or it's not, right? But that's how they looked at that. No investigation. No investigation of her death, no investigation of Dorothy's death. Both cases closed. All right, so I decide, okay, let's go a little further with this because something seems to be wrong. And so I find this column by Dorothy. MM has Hollywood talking again. You know what it says in there? Marilyn Monroe's life is on the upswing. She has a romance with somebody who's a bigger name than her first husband or second husband, Joe DiMaggio. She's got Broadway offers. She's got movie offers. She's doing all this. And of course, it doesn't take anybody has a brain to figure out that's not a woman who's going to commit suicide. So I decided I need to look into this further. And what did I come upon? If it's a bigger name than Joe DiMaggio, who's a bigger name? That guy right there and that guy right there. So I first looked at Jack Kennedy. That's Marilyn Monroe singing Happy Birthday to Jack Kennedy on his 45th birthday at Madison Square Garden. Hard to believe. I'm sorry for the photo of Marilyn, but there's no photo from the front. They're just looking at the back end of her, and she has on this see-through dress, okay? Well, you can watch that video on YouTube. And what we have then is afterwards, there's Jack on the right and Bobby on the left with Marilyn. She's on a march to death right then. On a march to death. Because what happens? She has a brief affair with Jack Kennedy, but Joe says, oh no, we got an election coming up, you can't be seen with her. So Jack Kennedy dumps her. Who comes along? Robert F. Kennedy. Still trying to show his dad and his brother that he's a big shot. You know, Joe Kennedy, and I have, there's a lot more in the book. One of them is I quote a book called The Kennedy Neurosis, written in 1973, that basically shows why the Kennedy men were sexual predators. And Joe Kennedy was the worst. And the way they treated the wives was the worst. And one of the things that he did, he had his trophy wife, Gloria Swanson, the movie actress. If you can believe it, at one point, Joe took his wife, Rose, to Europe on a ship. And on one end of the ship was Rose, and on the other end of the ship was Gloria Swanson. No morals, none of the Kennedys. And I've got many incidents of that in the book. So, Bobby Kennedy, okay, maybe Bobby Kennedy had something to do with her death. Let's go again. And this is the kicker. Every investigation I've done, there's a point where, aha, okay, aha. I find this, first I thought it was an FBI document. It's a CI document one day before Marilyn dies. And what is it? it basically shows, first in those first few paragraphs, it talks about Dorothy Kilgallen, JFK, and Marilyn Monroe each being obsessed with UFOs. Okay, and in the new book, I've got a picture of Dorothy in New Mexico because she was obsessed with UFOs and wrote about it and all of that kind of thing. It talks about the three of them being involved. And it's wiretaps of Bobby Kennedy and Marilyn Monroe's conversations. And I've solidified that the FBI did that. J. Edgar Hoover again. And then this is the damning evidence right here. Okay? It talks about that Marilyn Monroe is upset. And later I found out what she was all about. Bobby Kennedy had dumped her too. And she felt like a piece of meat. And she's going to the media with information about the love affairs. But the worst one, and the one that killed her, is the third or fourth one, whichever one it is on there, or the fifth one. Marilyn Monroe is going to the media about matters of national security that the Kennedys have told her, including JFK's intention to have Fidel Castro assassinated. She could talk about the love affairs, but if she went to the media with that, that's almost treason by the Kennedys. See, they wanted to be big shots with her. Joe Kennedy has his trophy girlfriend. Now Bobby Kennedy has his trophy girlfriend. And I've proven that Bobby was there on the day that she died, begged her not to go to the media and all that. And I have two fresh accounts in the book as to how he pulled it off, how he was complicit in her death. Because like Dorothy was the reporter who knew too much, Marilyn Monroe was the actress who knew too much. And I spell all that out in the book. Next. I want to humanize Marilyn Monroe in here because she's dismissed. She's dismissed as a dumb blonde to begin with. She read Ulysses. I couldn't read Ulysses, 5 pages. Okay? She read a book called Fragments, and I quote that in the book. All of her poetry, all of her writings, this was a very smart woman. Oh yes, she had her flaws as well, but this was a very smart woman, and a woman who should have been treated with distinction. And if we go back just one thing, the second part of the CIA document, Bobby Kennedy is having a torrid love affair with Marilyn Monroe during the summer of 1962. And this one. Bobby Kennedy has promised Marilyn Monroe that he will divorce Ethel and marry her. I have a visual of her sitting in her home. The Kennedys won't answer her phone calls anymore. Tears streaming down her cheeks. Dorothy wrote a column about her and Marilyn's quest for love in her life. And the other thing was going to happen, she was going to remarry Joe DiMaggio right before she died. Go ahead. But this is the real Marilyn. Okay? That's with Ella Fitzgerald. You know what she did there? Ella Fitzgerald was refused to allow to be entertained on Sunset Boulevard. And Marilyn found out about it. And she went ahead and told Ella she would be there every single night that Ella performed, and she did that. And that was the only way that Ella Fitzgerald was allowed to perform there. This is, that's her with, she loved children. She wanted to have children more than anything in the world, and she and Joe DiMaggio were going to adopt one before she died.
And it's John Steinbeck, the letter.
Oh, yes. I wish I had gotten a letter like this from John Steinbeck. See, he had a lot of respect for the people who knew the real Marilyn. Oh, go watch The Misfits, okay? That's Marilyn. She wanted to be acknowledged as a respected actress. Go watch that film. She was a respected actress. Okay, George. Are you worn out?
Nope, not at all.
All right.
That was really a very impressive blitz through your work. That.
Well, I want to share it with people. I hope I inspire people. If I can do this, anybody can. I'm telling you, you just have to, it is serendipitous, but you have to be alert. One of the things about the 1960s that bothers me so much, and George and I have talked about this, they didn't ask questions back then. And you're going to see that with the Warren Commission. They took everything for granted, that people were telling them the truth. And they weren't. They never asked questions about Dorothy's death. They never asked questions about Marilyn's. And they never asked questions about the Warren Commission. And I felt like a dumbhead because I didn't ask questions either. People need to ask questions today. You can't take what any politician or journalist or anybody says and just take it down your throat and believe it all. You have to ask questions. I hope that's the relevancy of my research. So, I'm done again. And what happened here? Let's go to the next okay. All right, the first thing that came up was that I had an interest in the Warren Commission again. I always felt like there was something that I didn't know there. And so, as it would happen, I went to the National Archives and looked up some material about the Warren Commission. Well, this is what I found. 2 conversations, both between J. Edgar Hoover and LBJ. Now, isn't that a pair? All right? And they were on 2 different dates. One's 10/31/64.
And one's 11/29/63.
11/29/63.
3, just 6 days, yeah.
That is an important date because that's the day the Warren Commission was formed. And they were talking in the morning. And if you go in there and you read, I don't know if, let's put it up there, okay? All right. So you're going to be able to look at these. It's a little bit harder for me. But here's what they're doing. They've decided that in their mind, everybody wants to investigate the JFK assassination, okay? They want to do it in Texas. That's where he was killed. They want to do it, the Senate and Congress and the House of Representatives, they want to do it. Well, these 2 decide, no, we can't let that happen. We need to make sure the only investigation is by us. And so you see, yes, J. Edgar Hoover on extension. Are you familiar with this proposed group that they are trying to put together on this study of your report? J. Edgar Hoover's report is the Oswald alone theory, and other things, 2 from the House, 2 from the Senate, somebody from the court, the couple of outsiders. No, I haven't heard of that. I've seen the report. We think that we don't have to. I want to just get by with your filing your report. J. Edgar Hoover, it would be very, very bad to have a rash of investigations. Well, the only way we can stop that, LBJ says, is probably appoint a high-level one investigating, evaluate what you put, someone that is pretty good on it that I can select, out of the government, tell the House and the Senate not to go ahead, and so on and so forth. Yes, because we get a bunch of television going, and I thought it'd be bad. And J. Edgar Hoover says it'd be a 3-ring circus. Okay, what's not on here is the second conversation. And what they do is they go through these list of possibles, okay? Jacob Javits from New York. Oh, no, he'll probably go to the media. This particular senator or congressman. Oh, no, we can't trust that person. Okay, and then they go down through these other pieces. One of them, for God's sakes, is Allen Dulles, the former head of the CIA that Jack Kennedy had fired. Okay? He's on the list. They've got this, anyway, we'll get to a little bit of that. Okay, so there's these guys, and they finally come up with 7 names, okay? And one of them, the one that's going to head the commission, boy, to give it authenticity, is none other than the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, Earl Warren. All of these gentlemen are conservative bent. All of them are older. They're old white men. And they're all, J. Edgar Hoover and LBJ believe they can control. They can control the rhetoric. They can control the investigation and all of that. And one of the most interesting things I found when I went through all of those phone calls is the next thing. There is this one exchange, J. Edgar Hoover. And I think, of course, we get near to next Tuesday. They think something bad is going to happen next Tuesday. There's going to be some sort of an announcement that could upset everything. And I think the likelihood of this rumoring going along that they can't prove and will not be able to prove, unless, of course, someone, one of these dirty columnists is apt to carry something in her column.
Her column.
Her column.
Not his column.
Her column.
Yeah.
Well, we know who that was, don't we? Okay, next. All right, so J. Edgar Hoover and Lyndon Johnson. Here's the group. I don't need to go through them all. Jerry Ford is on there. They decided Jerry Ford would work pretty well because he's a nothing. He's just he's just Jerry Ford from Michigan. Okay? They don't want anybody. F. Lee Bailey lost the Patty Hearst case by leaving a lieutenant in the Army on the jury. As a criminal defense lawyer, you never do that. You don't want anybody of authority on there because immediately they're either going to say, guilty or not guilty, and everybody's going to go along with that. Well, these guys want no leaders on here whatsoever. So they frankly, and I hate to call them this, they have, including Earl Warren, they have 7 wimps. Okay, 7 wimps, but that's deliberate. That's deliberate. Okay. So the Warren Commission, here's their conclusion, okay? After whatever this investigation was. No evidence Oswald in the planning, no evidence Oswald was involved in any person, no evidence Oswald was employed, no direct relationship by Oswald and Jack Ruby, no evidence that Jack Ruby acted alone. Alone, nothing, okay? And that's what we were fed. And that's what I believed. I never gave it a second thought. Because back then, and this is 1964, we trusted these people. We trusted these public servants that they were going to do their job and they were going to give us the truth about what happened to the President of the United States when he was killed. All right? And then they just took off on this, and we didn't know about it. And I feel badly that I never looked into it like I should have. Next. Well, somebody did. Somebody at the time had a real problem with this Warren Commission. And again, it's Dorothy. Dorothy shouting out the Oswald alone theory makes no sense in 1963, and nobody listens to her. And then she had this reaction to the Warren Commission in this particular column. A fascinating document, fascinating for what it says, as well as fascinating for what it leaves out, as well as fascinating for what it says. Why can she say that? Because she heard the Jack Ruby testimony. Because she heard his testimony at the Warren Commission. She knows this is a bunch of bull, okay? But nobody listens to her, all right? She's this What's My Line quiz show, participant. She's not somebody that can be taken seriously. If they had listened to her, history would have been changed. Okay? Next.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, okay. Here's Dorothy again on the job. Thank you, George. All right, so in the Warren Commission report, it mentions no connection between Jack Ruby and the police department of Dallas. Well, Dorothy decides to write a column about that, and you know where she gets her information? From acts, singers, dancers, fun people who were at the Carousel Club where Ruby was, all right? And they all see the police there. They're all being comped, they're all being given drinks, they're all being set up with the strippers, and I have another account of that in the book as well. All that's left out, you see, because that, it's a good example of, and this is where I have so much trouble with many of the authors of books, so-called experts and all that. If you don't have Dorothy Kilgallen's research in your book, it's no good. But what they do is they decide they want the Oswald alone result, and so they only have evidence that goes to that result, and they take everything else out. Okay? And that's what we've been fed all these years. It's just horrid. The worst example is the 6th floor museum at Dealey Plaza. Oswald alone shrine. No books are in there other than Oswald alone. No speakers are allowed. I'm not allowed. Their exhibits are 5 years old with regard to what people see. And it's not too long ago I got an email from a mother who had taken her 2 children there and showed them everything, and then she emailed me because she watched one of my presentations down in Dallas and found out all this, and she said I was crying and I apologized to my children. I'm trying to get that damn place closed, and I'll keep working on it. Okay. Okay, here's the kicker. I don't know how it happens, ladies and gentlemen. I don't know how it happens. On the left, you got Bobby, you got JFK, and you got J. Edgar Hoover. Maybe 3 of the best. No, I don't want to say that. 3 of the worst human beings who ever lived. I'm sorry. JFK did some good things. He saved us from a nuclear disaster with the missile crisis. Bobby was good with civil rights. Just despicable human beings with no moral values, any of the 3. And this guy then comes along. February. Lou will tell you, my wife, I just almost started screaming because I got an email from this gentleman named Morris Wolf, who in an email said to me, I just watched your presentation at a library near Dallas at the Allen Library, and I saw that you saw about Dorothy Kilgallen in there. I knew her. And that was amazing because a lot of people aren't even alive anymore who knew her, okay? And so I start talking with Morris.
And Morris's 86th birthday was yesterday.
That's right.
Yeah.
And I start finding out about this guy, okay, after what he told me, but I want to preface it by telling you what I found out. As distinguished a man as you could ever find. Yale lawyer. We won't hold that against him, okay? He was a Yale lawyer. He then ends up working for Bobby Kennedy, and my ears are just overflowing. I'm writing as fast as I can. And I worked for Bobby Kennedy, and I worked for him when he was in the Attorney General's office, and knew him. And I was there when Jack Kennedy was in the White House. And Mr. Shaw, I was in the White House, with both of them. In fact, it's kind of amazing. They trusted me to deal with exchanges between these two men, the President and the Attorney General, messages between the White House and the Justice Department. I rode my bicycle back and forth, or I walked back and forth with messages because they didn't trust that J. Edgar Hoover wasn't wiretapping their phones. He said, the two brothers are quite a story, really, together. They got along real well, except when JFK thought Bobby was getting too much exposure in the newspapers. I love that story. But it shows the little things that he told me, all right? And then he said, I have to tell you this. Bobby Kennedy recommended me, I don't know if it's the next file or not. Bobby Kennedy recommended me to a member on the Warren Commission. And I spent almost 2 years with that member. And I was his legislative assistant. And Mr. Shaw, I rode with him in his Saab. He was a tall man, he could barely squeeze in. I rode with him to the Warren Commission hearings, and it's amazing, but at times I would be able to wait on him and sit in the back and listen to the hearings. And what I noticed, and we're going to get into that, is that what they were really doing is the members of the commission weren't even there. It was the staff members who were doing all this investigation. Well, who do you think decided upon that? Because they could control the staff members when they couldn't control some of these individuals on the Warren Commission. And he said, on the way there, Mr. Shaw, I have to tell you, here's what this particular man told me. The commission members already know about the Jack Ruby connection to organized crime, but they don't want to touch it. That's probably the most important one. It's more than Oswald, but Hoover and Chief Justice Earl Warren keep pushing the Oswald alone conclusion. Our new president, Lyndon Baines Johnson, now wants to cover up and move on. They want to bury the truth under a pile of stones. And here's the rationalization why they came up with this ludicrous Oswald alone conclusion. They, the members, say that this Oswald alone conclusion is for God and country, but there is internal corruption, and I don't know why. I have offered my resignation.
Now, the person who's making these comments is the
Warren
senator
Commission. It's the Warren Commission member that we're going to identify in a minute.
It's not Morris Wolf
for the
worked
first time.
for him, but this was the senator from Kentucky.
And I will tell you that, just so you know, I'm very careful when I have hearsay evidence like this, like I used to do in the courtroom, to confirm it. If I'm going to approach a judge and try to get him to admit it, I've got to have confirmation. So I'll get ahead of myself. Well, let's just wait a minute. I'll show you how I got my confirmation. Okay, it was amazing. He said, listen, go on the internet and find the photograph of the Warren Commission giving the report to LBJ, okay? So I did. Well, you can look through here, and I don't need to go through all the names and everything, but there's Jerry Ford back there, and there's Alan Dulles, and I think that is Lee Rankin, who's the counsel there. There's Warren. This is Hale Boggs, I think from Mississippi. He said, Mr. Shaw, go ahead and look at everybody there, and you'll see them all standing by themselves except one man. He's almost hiding behind Hale Boggs. And look at the look on his face. And that is Senator John Sherman Cooper of Kentucky. That is the Warren Commission member that Morris Wolf worked for and gave me this information about. That's the one. And what he said and everything changes history. Go ahead, next. Warren Commission member Cooper. I found all kinds of tributes to this man. He and his wife Lorraine were best friends with John and Jackie Kennedy. They were the first couple to go to the White House, be invited there. All the tributes that I found, there's a bunch of them in the book, but this is the one that made all the difference in the world to me, from Jacqueline Onassis. He was a man of great character. And then, it was an article written that quoted Jackie. He was a man of great character. She even compared him to another beloved Kentucky leader, Abraham Lincoln, not in his ability to connect with individuals from small towns, Kentucky, communities abroad. It's a question of character, really. If the man seems to you wise, profound, compassionate, intelligent, learned, well, you're going to look up to him. And then he was also loved, couldn't help be loved. You just spend 15 minutes with him and you're going to like him. He was a man of the truth, like Dorothy Kilgallen was a woman of the truth. So now I got my two witnesses, don't I? Dorothy Kilgallen at the Ruby trial, and all these authors and everybody else that think they know about the JFK assassination. They weren't there. I wasn't there. Dorothy was there. Okay? Jackie Onassis was there at the time, and so was Senator John Sherman Cooper. There he is with his buddy Jack Kennedy. Very, very close friend. Mutual respect. So you can imagine when JFK died, he wanted to get at the truth, and he was well-meaning. He really was. I don't have a bit of respect for any one of these Warren Commission members. I hope you don't. And John Sherman Cooper should have spoken up, but I'll tell you why he didn't. Okay, what did I do with Cooper? Again, common sense. I want to find out more about this guy, and the way you can do that is with oral histories. I'm proud of the fact that Purdue University, my alma mater, is archiving my body of work, and we did an oral history there. That's where you can find out information about people that right from their mouth. So I went to his oral histories, not only at the University of Kentucky, but also at the University of Georgia. And there were the comments that are indicative of what he told Morris Wolf. And here's why it's all about his disgust. In a minute we'll show that he submitted his letter of resignation because you know what? They purposely didn't tell him when the hearings were being held. They didn't want him there. They didn't want any of those people there. Let the staff members do it. So what did he ask for? He and Richard Russell, a senator from Georgia, demanded after all the investigation, a dissent or minority report in the Warren Commission report to the effect they did not believe in the silver bullet theory, they didn't believe it was Oswald alone, and so on and so on and so forth. And LBJ and Hoover promised that, and guess what happened when the report came out? It wasn't in there. If that dissent would have been in that report, it would have changed everything. They couldn't have gone ahead with all of this Oswald alone, perpetuated for almost 60 years. A lie. The most alarming governmental corruption in history, in my opinion, and others who've read my research. They lied to us. They conned us. And one of the reasons is because they didn't have that dissent in there. So, circle back to Dorothy Kilgallen having the Warren Commission Jack Ruby testimony. Where the hell did she get it, I always wondered, right? All right? Morris Wolf. I talked to him. And you would have done this too. George would have for sure.
Right.
Listen, they were close friends. Well, just a second. We'll get to that. Okay. So who could have given it to her? Well, she printed on the front page of the Journal American, and Morris Wolf I'm interviewing, so I started talking to him about it. Go ahead. This is the interview that J. Edgar Hoover did with Dorothy Kilgallen. His agents did. She would identify the source as a responsible person who had a legal right to the transcript. The person, and then she goes down here more. She refused to answer this question, whether it was a member of the Warren Commission. Did she legally receive the copy of the transcript? She refused to answer, and so on and so forth. And the person who gave it to her was a friend of long standing, a friendly gesture. And here is the one sentence that depicts Dorothy Kilgallen, this integrity that she had. she would rather die than reveal his identity. That's what she told him. She wouldn't give up her source. All right? So we've now got then, is this the next one?
Yeah, that was the next one.
Okay. So I wanted to look also, before I talk to Morris Wolf about the Warren Commission testimony that Dorothy got, I wanted to look and see what these two gentlemen did with the Warren Commission. Just awful. They used the Assistant Attorney General Katzenbach to block any investigation of the Kennedys. Joe didn't want any investigation. Why? Because he fixed the '60 election. He didn't want anybody to look into that. And Bobby Kennedy doesn't want any investigation. Why? Because he was complicit in Marilyn Monroe's death. And if he had been prosecuted in 1962, as he should have been, based on all the evidence of the time, here's what would have happened. He would have had to have resigned as Attorney General, all right? He would have never, those people, Marcello and his gang who killed JFK wouldn't have had to do so because Bobby would have been powerless then. And also there would have been Dorothy Kilgallen wouldn't have died because there would have been no JFK assassination for who to investigate. Katzenbach wrote a letter to the members saying, you are, just echoing what J. Edgar Hoover said after JFK died, you should only investigate Oswald alone and nothing else. These guys. All right, then you got LBJ and self-protection for LBJ. Why does he want the Oswald alone theory? Because he doesn't want anybody to look into his past dealings with oil, all the things going on in Texas and everything else. I found a KGB document of all things that said the Russians felt that Lyndon Johnson was responsible for the death of JFK. Well, he doesn't want anybody investigating that. Hoover certainly doesn't, because he's come up with the Oswald alone theory, and if there's any investigation other than that, he looks like a fool. Because you have to realize, if it's an Oswald alone did this, then he's a nut. There's no way the FBI could have known about him, so Hoover can't be held responsible. But if they go beyond that and find any, and I don't use the C word at all, I use plot, because if you use the C word, it lumps everything into what could have happened. It's a plot. There was a plot to kill JFK. So he doesn't want anybody to look into that because it makes him look like a fool, and that's Katzenbach. Assistant Attorney General, and he's telling them all, come on, my boss says, and da-da-da-da, nothing but Oswald alone. Here's Cooper. Something strange is happening. Warren and Katzenbach know all about the FBI, and they are apparently, and others, planning to show Oswald only one who considered this to me as untenable position. I must insist on outside counsel. But he didn't speak up, and he should have. And if you're asking why Morris Wolf gave me all of this, he told me. He said, I felt like it was the time. And I said, you know, why didn't Senator Cooper speak up? And he said, just out of loyalty. Just out of loyalty. That's no excuse. This is a letter of resignation. Again, the documents, all of this are in Fighting for Justice. He didn't send the letter. Okay? This is where he said they didn't invite him to the hearing. He's a member of the commission and they don't invite him to the hearings. Can you imagine that? They don't want to. They don't want a thinking person there. They want all the wimps. Didn't send it. Okay. All the way through the years, I'm not going to go through this.
Yeah.
But this is all the times they could have investigated the JFK assassination. And here's what CBS did in 1967. 4 nights of investigation. You can go watch it on YouTube. 125,000 people talked to, 125,000 miles they went. All of these people they talked to, and you know what they came up with? Well, they got it right, the Warren Commission. Dan Rather, all those guys. Consequences, the Warren Commission. The lie has been perpetuated for 60 years. But here's the consequence. Marcello never got investigated. He walked away. And there's no question, I've connected him. The Warren Commission is not a mystery. Dorothy Kilgallen's death is not a mystery. Marilyn Monroe's death is not a mystery. Hopefully I've cleared that up with three true crime murder mysteries that aren't even mysteries. But Marcello, Dorothy had it right, okay? And you know what the proof is that Dorothy had it right? They killed her. They killed her. And in the morning she died, guess who sent his agents to her townhouse and stole all of her written documents, all of her files and everything else? None other than J. Edgar Hoover. They've never been found. But Dorothy had it right. And how she had it right was just use common sense. 60 election fix, double cross. Bobby Kennedy, appointed Attorney General, goes after Marcello. Marcello orchestrates JFK's death through two of his individuals that worked for him, a guy named Campisi and Civillo in Dallas. They set it all up for JFK to be killed. And you know some proof right there? Guess who the first person is that visited Jack Ruby in jail after he was arrested? Carlos Marcello's chief lieutenant in Dallas, Joe Campisi. Just makes sense. And then, one more thing. I think Melvin Belli knew about the assassination before it took place. I found a witness who was with Belli when Jack Ruby, at the time when Jack Ruby shot Lee Harvey Oswald. And the witness told me, the waiter came up and said, "You're never going to believe this. A guy named Jack Ruby just shot Oswald." And you know what Melvin Belli said? "Now I'll have to represent Ruby." He was on call with his mafia buddies, dirty as can be. I'm ashamed that I even knew the guy. Sorry. I want to humanize.
Why don't you mince words a little bit more, Mark?
I will. You can see I get, well, let me just tell you one other thing I'd like to do, if you don't mind. Just throw that away. That's the Warren Commission report. It's worthless. Absolutely worthless, filled with corruption. But JFK should have never died. His brother and his father killed him through their actions. And if you go look at a photograph of Joe Kennedy, when Ted Kennedy walked into his bedroom, you know he had a stroke, Joe. He looks at the front page of the New York Times and he goes like this. He knew. He knew what happened. He knew. But JFK, I mean, you can look and you can see all of the wonderful things that he did. His children, he never, look at Dorothy Kilgallen. She never got to know her young children, 3 of them. Marilyn Monroe never got to remarry and possibly have a child or adopt one. JFK with those 2 little kids, never got to know them at all. Just tragic that these 3 individuals died. Okay? There's Carrie that went to the White House with Dorothy. This is Lenny Bruce. This is how courageous Dorothy was. You may know who that was, the comedian with the dirty language and all of that, arrested in Greenwich Village. Guess who testified for him? Dorothy Kilgallen. Said he may be obscene, his language may be awful, but he's got a right to say it. That's how she was, courageous. And Frank Sinatra, don't get me started. 2 chapters on him in the book. Just one of the worst human beings that ever lived. Yes, whenever I hear one of his songs, my wife knows I want to walk out of the restaurant. He actually was an enabler into Marilyn Monroe dying because he introduced Marilyn into the cesspool, I think as George called it, or whatever it was in your description of my talk. Introduced her to the Kennedys. She got involved with the Kennedys. And beat up reporters, did all that kind of stuff. I have no good feeling for Sinatra, okay? So I went through this before, and you can look at it in the book. I guess these people I know are going to the opera, and I do believe they should. That gets better than this. But all this just, the most alarming governmental corruption in history. And I do believe that's what we've shown here with all of this new evidence. And I hope it does change history, and I hope people wake up to what really happened.
We almost had a treat for you tonight. Morris Wolf was going to try to come in by live stream to talk, but his health deteriorated the last couple of weeks. As I said, he had his 86th birthday yesterday. But he was ready to testify in the program if he had been up for it.
So that's why I've tried to honor him, because he came forward. Nobody else had ever come forward like that. And, I should say, too, he wrote a book called Whatever Happened to Raoul Wallenberg. If you know who that is, that's the Swedish man who saved, they say, almost 100,000 individuals during the Holocaust. ended up in a Russian prison. You know, went over time and time again with no money at all and tried to get him out of prison? Morris Wolf. Bless him. Okay, anything else we got up here?
Nope, that's it. And
I think we got the pictures of the book, George.
the books. Oh, there's two more. I'm sorry. Books. Yes. Well, that's not important.
I'm just kidding.
Usually we ask questions. If there's anybody that would like to ask a question. All right, here's a question from online. Hang on. Got to get to it. From Greg Hanna. I watched the Misfits movie many years ago. It was done well in black and white. I did read later that Marilyn was supposedly drinking more and showing up late to the set, wondering if that is true. Those are the main way of explaining her behavior and the difficulty of working with her. But at the same time, there was a certain amount of respect for her, too.
Well, she had her issues. There's no question about it. She had some drug issues and all of that. You know, being the most famous movie star in the world isn't the easiest thing to do. But with the Misfits, I think a lot of that is Hollywood rumor in terms of what happened. What's important is what was on the screen. Mm-hmm. And if you watch that, is it Clark Gable that's in that film, I think,
right.
with her?
Yes.
And you see what he said about her, and he's there. Again, see an eyewitness who's there. I think that's the best testimony about what Marilyn was like at that time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Oh, Clark Gable died right after that film.
I think
Right.
so.
And then some people say it's because he had to work with Marilyn.
Oh my gosh, George.
It's pretty hard, you know, it's pretty hard to come to one of the nice
Can you
things
prove
about-
that, George?
No, I can't prove anything. Proof, Pythagorean theorem and proof, that's the kind of proof that I like, but you have a lot of evidence, and what I really like is the kind of common sense conclusions about what's missing from it, you know. Dorothy seemed to be a good common sense reporter going after the things. Too bad we really don't have her information. And I'm sure that the disappearance of it was, you know, intentional. So, any other questions, or will you wrap this up? Here's one more question over here. We'll finish with that question. Here comes
How did they get Oswald to pull the trigger, or was it somebody else that did it?
Well, you'd be made surprised at this. I've very little that I've investigated Oswald. Dorothy didn't do so either. There's so many dead ends there with regard to that guy, and what he was, and who he was, and were there 2 or 3 of them, or whatever, and who was he involved with. Dorothy focused on Ruby. Ruby was the key in her mind. All of her writings are focused on Ruby. So I don't know what happened in Dealey Plaza. Nobody knows. Were there 3 or 4 or 1 person or whatever there? But there's no question, as Senator Cooper said, that he did that alone. He obviously had some individuals who were in concert with him, and I think Dorothy had it right. She had decided that this one man who had the strongest motive to kill JFK, Carlos Marcello, was able to recruit Oswald as one of those people who could have been involved in JFK's death.
Well, I'm sorry you did all that research, because when I was 10 years old, you know, and I watched Jack Ruby shoot Lee Harvey Oswald live on television, my first thought was, that's just the way the mafia does things.
See, you were right on. You knew. You're a smart man, George.
I haven't read ever since then, no.
I understand.
Anyway, thank you very much for coming, and Mark, thanks for sharing that.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Justice
Justice
for
for Dorothy.
Dorothy.
That's what I'm going to keep trying. That's what my button says, and that's my fraternity brother out there who's backing me up. Another Purdue guy. Thanks so much. Thank you, George.
Yeah.
You're a good man. Appreciate it.